that have these, I'm expecting that the people that have these non-conforming ventures are trying very hard to comply in order to be able to continue their business here. At least 3 of them are doing that. I don't know. There's one that I'm not sure is still around, but that in a way, the way that we've structured our current ordinance, there's a tremendous amount of incentive for them to comply and be, if you will, model citizens, becoming part of our of what we've already established as a pretty rigorous set of requirements, under which it appears there are now 3 that have been approved, and only 1 of which has been in operation. So when we talk, your very first question, Mr. Williams, went to that. To what degree, and I don't know to whom to turn, to what degree are the problems and the issues and the concerns that the public is experiencing, not just projecting, but experiencing, related to these non-conforming pharmacies and the one that's been approved? Or are these things that people have been experiencing that they voice their concerns about something that's happening from those that are not within our system at this point, that have just popped up all over the place, that I was addressing and that Mr. Jordan talked about a minute ago, that I was asking Officer Martell about?
Does either the police department or zoning enforcement have an opinion as to where some of these things that have been cited, such as resale, particularly to minors, which is a concern of all of ours, coming from? Are illegal dispensaries, non-conforming dispensaries? Do we have any cases of where this has come up, and or calls for service?
Well, Chair and Council, Ramona Martell from the Police Department. As I mentioned the last time we met, there are cases in the past where the businesses that were, whether they're non-conforming, illegal at that time, had experienced some crime, some level of crime. I mentioned some robberies occurred, some extortions, and things like that. And since then, there was maybe a gap between the 2007 to now, and we've experienced other type of levels of crime, such as where it's reached out into the community, such as the one on Oceano, where a person who had medicinal marijuana was robbed. So it was a home invasion. We've had others where people going from a dispensary home with their product have been robbed. So we've had those things, and they've been out in the media. So maybe some of the concerns that the public is echo is things that they've seen, and maybe whether it's real or perceived, they're bringing to your attention. In regards to the children, the kids, we based our ordinance on 500 feet. Well, they're just Milpas. There was 2 dispensaries there that may or may not be in the travel of some of the kids going through. But there has been arrests or citations or informal process done at the schools. I mentioned there was 4 that we were involved in, where at the high school there were kids caught with less than an ounce of marijuana. But in reality, as mentioned by one of the speakers, there's probably about 60 informal violations there. So we are experiencing them, whether informally or formally by the police. So
do you have
kind of the answer?
Yeah, I guess what I'm trying to go back to, and Mr. Chair, is see, there may be, I believe that there's some benefit to there's a lot of benefit to regulating and to holding very strong conditions around each of any dispensary or collective or whatever that shows up in Santa Barbara. If we are being effective with that approach, I'd like to continue it. If we're not being effective with it and it's causing harm, then we need to make a change. I can't tell from anything we're being told at this point that these 1, 2, 3, 4, and then a couple that are down here that are still not the one you were talking about, that they are actually causing the problems that we're talking about. And I'm really asking for some, and you may not be able to provide it for me now. For instance, the schools, we've heard from them in written form that they're having students say that they are getting their marijuana from these, or from dispensaries, from medical marijuana dispensaries. Now, I don't know if that's real or not. I mean, I wouldn't rat on my friend that I got the marijuana from. I would say I got it from a dispensary. I want to find out, I want to know whether, if we're going to make changes to this, as much as we possibly can, how much, do we have good citizen businesses here that are actually fulfilling on what we did with our original ordinance or not?
Well, Chair and committee, I don't believe we've been able to trace back some of the crimes that have occurred or some of the impacts to our community to the dispensaries themselves through the police department, or like you said, some of the kids admitting where they received the marijuana. A lot of the citations noted before on just a general less than 1 ounce of marijuana, those were illegally bought. They weren't directed back to a dispensary because we would have not cited at that point. So I don't believe we're tracing any of these back to dispensaries. But some of these dispensaries are non-conforming and are not fitting the ordinance at this point.
Right, and what we are asking for is that we be very rigorous with our ability to, with enforcing what we've got here. Anyway, I'll just make a little comment to go along with something I heard you say a minute ago. I'm concerned about a complete moratorium because I think that the degree to which we can regulate and manage the situation distinguishes us from the communities that didn't do that. We saw what happened in L.A. It got completely out of hand, and I do feel very strongly that we should set some kind of a limit on the number that we approve in the city, and I'm not sure what that number should be, but I believe we should do something to begin to if you will, manage, at least for the near future, how many that we have. Then we can take another look and see if it's a problem or not. But I'm not as comfortable maybe as you are with accelerating this because I feel like we have an incentive right now for these folks to stay doing good business according to our current ordinance, and they may very well transition within whatever limit that we have because they've run a clean shop.
But they're not permitted under our current ordinance. So.
Well, they were grandfathered in, and we gave them some assurance before. Maybe, Mr. Wiley, would you help me on this just a little bit more, please? I have a big concern about that we had originally given those who were there when we established this ordinance a clear sense of how long they had to make a transition. They either go out of business or they find another place. And for us to change that after we've made that promise to them, I think that's really where it comes down to for me on this small group that we have here. Unless they're doing something wrong. If they're doing something wrong, shut them down, do what we need to do to enforce it. But
Councilmember House, I think you've accurately summarized it. It is in the nature of zoning ordinances that they change. And it's not usually this quick because we're back at this 18 months or so since we were last at it. And I can't honestly remember who exactly was on the ordinance committee at the time, but I believe it was at least the three of you. And we had a lot of hearings, and they were over at the Gebhardt room. And the tone of those hearings was, in my opinion, very different. That the tone then, the public sense then, again, in my opinion, was we need, as a city, to find a way to make some of these dispensaries available to people. And at that point, prior to that, we didn't have any regulations, and this appeared to be a legal business. So we had a legal type of business. We had those four established in the city. And when we did this, when the council adopted this existing ordinance, it said, all right, well, you're grandfathered in, but we did something we don't typically do. We imposed a 3-year amortization period, and we're 18 months into that now, or so, 17 months. And now we're changing things, and that's, like I said, that's the nature of zoning ordinances. That's it's legal, it's constitutional, because it does happen, and the police power, the city councils are supposed to respond to public concerns like this, and so it's
okay.
It's
well,
hard
I wish we had. I mean, I don't wish it were this way, but if it were that any of those were actually violating our current ordinance, that to me is the hook. And I don't have anyone yet telling me that those four well, let's see, are violating it except for the proximity piece. And to me, the spirit of it, they're maintaining what we originally said. If there was something different happening, and I'm looking for evidence. I really am. Somebody tell me, how are they violating our ordinance right now, in which case we'll go after it and enforce. But other than that, I don't feel comfortable. And just to answer your question, I don't feel comfortable changing what we originally said.
Mr. Francisco, you have one?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with Mr. Wiley, and I think there was a different way of looking at this earlier. And personally, I'm not a doctor, and very fortunately, I'm not suffering from some medical condition that causes chronic pain. So I don't have that experience. And for all I know, medical marijuana may be the best medical solution for some people. I have no opinion on that because I just don't know. But I certainly agree that that's a possibility, and I would like to be able to see those people who truly need something like that for a medical condition to get care. On the other hand, what has changed since we first talked about this and talked about how long people would have to come into conformance with the new ordinance, what has changed is our actual experience. What we're seeing, and I think especially this is tied to change in federal policy at the DEA, is a proliferation, not just in Santa Barbara, but in lots of cities where dispensaries have been allowed. And so I think we're looking at changed circumstances. That's why we're here today. That's why this room is full. It wasn't full before when we were considering this. Now we have more experience with it. And I think since we did try to craft a rational ordinance, and since we are trying to make more changes to that ordinance to make it better, I think it's reasonable. One of those changes, a reasonable change, is to reduce the amount of time that the existing non-conforming establishments have to come into conformance. That seems rational to me. That seems to be a direct outgrowth of the kind of discussion that we're in today. So I would be comfortable with saying that we will reduce the time for the non-conforming establishments to conform to, say, 6 months after adoption. And I would also be comfortable with a moratorium on new applications. I think both of those things would conform with the spirit of what we've learned over the last several months.
Well, let's stick to amortization for now. But I agree that we, and my reasoning is that we have this situation where this city actually has no experience. Both from a government standpoint and the citizens have no experience of what a permitted dispensary behaves under our previous ordinance, because none of them have been open long enough for us to have any experience in that. Our entire experience is with illegal dispensaries and with ones that are currently non-conforming. And people have some problems with some of those, and I understand that, and I think we need to address that. And the only way for us to address that is to make sure that those that are now existing outside of the city's regulation have to come into conformance with the city's regulation. That's the only way we can even tell if our regulation is good or bad, because if we have most of our dispensaries existing outside of regulation, we'll never even know whether our regulation is good or bad. So my feeling is that we need to shorten the amortization period to 6 months, and I'll make a motion for a recommendation to council to that effect.
Second.
Can we get a vote on that? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
No.
Okay.
And Mr. Chair, let me say something real quick. The issue, I think, that the way I would like us to approach this in terms of a substantive reflection of what the council was asking for would be that we work hard on what the right limit would be for the number of, I mean, you and I, well, we all worked real hard on this whole business about the restrictions and how that created these places in town where you could cite a dispensary within our current ordinance, and got down to the point that if you expanded the circles bigger, you almost proscribe certain locations, and you can cut. So I have an issue with approaching it that way. But I have no problem with establishing a limit to the number that we would set. And I think that as part of this, I'm concerned about using the moratorium approach. I'll explain why. It sort of goes along with what I said a minute ago. We already have one that's in operation. We have a couple others that have been approved. And by being approved, they've agreed to meet every one of these bullet points that we have here and all these conditions. We don't have experience, but with one, and the one we don't have anything bad to say about it, except that they called for service when somebody wouldn't leave or something. Okay. I want there to be...
I would also call somebody if someone wouldn't leave my premises.
I would want of the patients group, for instance.
Except in City Hall, I pretty much take any comer.
These that are in the non-conforming category, I think that there should be an option. Though we've got some that are pending and we've got some that are non-conforming, there should be some opportunity for some few of those to be able to apply and be able to be approved. But I want that incentive to still be there for these non-conforming ones that have such a short period of time to respond, that they would really keep their business running well and be possibly considered for a location. Now, at some point, there's going to be competition because it'll be a point where we'll have to wait till somebody leaves business for there to be an opening available for somebody else to be in the queue to become one of those. But I'm just going to go to the point that was just raised a moment ago. We really can't forget that there is a very serious reason, sincere and serious reason why compassionate, this whole idea of medical marijuana is there. And we just came through our situation in our family with, we were discussing this morning. If there were times where if we had actually had this as an option, I think we may have really taken advantage of it with what Peggy went through. And I look at people in town here who are going through cancer, going through the chemotherapy, and others, some young people that we know very, very well who are going through very serious situations. And it's critically important that they have this, and the voters have supported that. So I think we need to find that balance, and this is what we're trying to get, this balance. So I would propose that at some point, I don't even know what number to put out there, but we set some number that's that limits it so we don't get what everybody's afraid of. So a city full of dispensaries that are just more than we need for our population, that could in fact drive prices down and create a whole encouragement of a problem we don't need.
That's a good suggestion. We'll go next to the issue of the cap. And first, I guess the question is, do we want a cap? The second question is, do we want an overall cap? And what would we suggest the overall cap be? And do we want a geographic cap as well, which has been suggested by the Citizens Ordinance? And my 2 cents is we do want a cap. We may want to parcel that out geographically, and if I guess my sense is, first of all, the Milpas corridor already has enough that whatever cap we put it at, there won't be any more on the east side. I can't see us permitting a reasonable cap that would allow any more on the east side because the concentration already exists. And so I think that is an important point to address some of the concerns. And the question is whether we have, 1 or 2 west of state. Do we allow still something to exist in the Mission area and in not the Mission, but Mission Street and State? And do we allow one to exist on the Mesa, or do we expand to other areas, I guess is the question.
Chair?
Yes.
I hesitate to interrupt, but sometimes it's helpful to have some back and forth on this sort of thing. And I think I would suggest that looking at a cap in isolation is probably a bit too simplistic. We don't, as Councilmember House was mentioning, we don't really have a lot of empirical evidence. It's honestly mostly anecdotal evidence. And so what basis do we have to pick a cap? Yet, I think there is a sense that we don't want to have an unlimited number of dispensaries in town. And you mentioned the concept of parceling things out geographically. Can I suggest that any discussion of a cap be kind of in conjunction with parceling things out geographically? What I'm hearing is this sort of distribution of potential sites for dispensaries. And I say this in part because those of us in town, we know this town pretty well. We know the commercial areas of this town. And we do have some experience with dispensary locations that don't seem to be getting a whole lot of objection from people, if you will. Some upper State Street locations seem to be, we don't seem to be getting a lot of complaints about those, for example. But I think, as I say, we know when someone talks about Upper De La Vina corridor or Upper State Street or Cliff and Meigs, we all know that fairly well. We can, and it might be a better approach to look at specific areas of town where block faces might have a dispensary permissible, retaining locational requirements that you not have a dispensary next to each other, that there be some separation between dispensaries if appropriate. We've talked about Cottage Hospital area. So rather than focus on radius requirements or within so many feet of a school or childcare, et cetera, which in fact we're finding we don't know everything we need to know, and we're learning after the fact, oh, well, there was a school there that we didn't know about. And I suspect we can find out about child care centers that we didn't know about, that we look at actual block face locations throughout the city, and when we do the examination or the discussion of a cap in that context, because frankly, that's sort of the approach I'm hearing that seems to be what people are asking about or asking for.
Mr. Chair, I think that's going to, it's good. It's going to require some more work than we can do today, for sure. I would like us to do that. Yeah, I'd like us to do that kind of. I want to say something to the issue, and I think it was just raised here. I respect so highly Dr. Sarvis and John. I got to tell you, when and our school board and the concerns that are being raised here. I mean, I can't even tell you what I'm struggling with is the nexus, quite honestly, between a proximity, say, and access, and the way that the way a dispensary is properly regulated to not allow access unless it is somebody who's actually has a doctor's recommendation, and how that whole thing works, plus the educational component of it. Right now, the young people are getting drugs, and this is a terrible tragedy everywhere we go. They're getting drugs, and they're getting them from the street, they're getting them from their friends, they're getting them from all sorts of sources, and those sources have access to other kinds of drugs that make it even a whole lot worse. And I mean, this is a huge problem, and I'm right there with you. I'm having the hardest time, just really with this one, as to how we get get that balance, so we protect the children from the drugs that could cause them great harm and hurt their education. On the other hand, that we are making sure that those who really need this from a medical perspective have access to it, and have it in a decent way. They don't go to a sleazy part of town, and for some seniors, your grandmother or somebody who really needs that. So this is the trouble. And I think, first of all, if we can go after caps, find places in town where we would feel, and it's going to be a big discussion, where we feel like we could have those be. But I'm seeing numbers in the probably 5 or 6 or something, but for the whole town. And if you look at the numbers that we have here, there's one in Upper De La Vina that's been operating under just quiet as can be for I don't know how long. Milpa Street and the east side is way overserved, or at least has more than enough to meet the distribution. But I think I'd like to look at it from that perspective. The other way of doing 1,000 feet is so arbitrary, and it could put it in somebody's backyard where you just wouldn't want it. I mean, can't we be rational about it, I guess is my question.
I'm struggling for the balance too. I think we should have a cap. I think you're in the neighborhood of where the cap numbers should be. But I think we're probably going to have to come up with the details of what the cap will be at our next session, as well as address the other laundry list of issues in the rest of the ordinance. So I am going to recommend that we continue the discussion, but can we at least get to a consensus and a motion that we will recommend to council a cap?
I'll move that. A unspecified, just so we can get the staff going and work on something for
Yes.
us. So.
That's a motion. Is there a second?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
I think what Mr. Wiley raised was a good point, and that the idea of a cap outside of any consideration of the actual locales is too simplistic. So if that's agreed,
Yes.
I'll second it. I'll second
That's what I'm moving, because I really like that approach. I think it would be helpful and give all of us a chance to look at it more rationally.
Okay.
Fair
A
enough.
motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? And we'll continue this hearing for, is it 1 week or 2 weeks? You don't know, Lori? Okay. Well, I will please email Mr. Cotto or myself, and we could give you an update as to whether it will be a week from now or 2 weeks from now. I think it will be at noon, and I think we are going to have to probably not have very much public comment. I mean, I know you want to voice your concerns, and I want to hear all your concerns. The problem is if we spend the entire hearings listening to your concerns, we can't do anything to strengthen the regulation. So my hope is we will set another hearing and continue this discussion. And what I will do is try to allow some time for further public comment if it is particularly germane to one of the points, meaning if you have something, a recommendation on one of the laundry list, if you have something that was not said in this discussion or last week's, I will still invite you and still allow time for public comment, but we will ask people to not say the same thing 3 times in a row so that we can get some business done.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I just wanted to mention that under the Brown Act, if you want to take a little break from public comment and work on some more specifics, there's no reason why we can't do that, and then just ask the public to comment on the, as the proposal gets a little bit more specific. So, and I think that's kind of what you just said.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Wiley. Mr. Cato.
Yeah, Chair Williams, I'd like to ask, what would you like us to do as far as these locations? I've done a lot of mapping. It's all online. I have done it basically radii from various distances from schools and parks. And, I mean, that can be a baseline for people to kind of look around, or I could look around to see what might be left over from that. Do you want me to do some mapping and bring something back for the next time, or do you just want to...
Well, why don't we just take the time to actually look at your maps online first, and I can as chair, I can request you to bring some further information if that's insufficient. But I don't want to tell you and send you to go forth and do something when you've already done obviously a lot, and we should take a look at that material first. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Cato. And thank you for bearing with us for this entire hearing. I really appreciate your involvement.